2020 has shown us that there arise circumstances beyond one's personal control. And no matter how self-reliant and independent the individual claims to be, these are times that call for collective action. The course of events during 2020 brought calls for justice, unity, change, as conflict, confusion, and chaos became the order of the day. Just as night follows day and day follows night, what goes around comes around as we move into a new cycle of time. This time is marked. Earth's rotation around the sun marks daily cycles, monthly cycles, seasonal changes such as the winter solstice, December 21st, 2020, annual cycles that mark one's date of birth, New Year's, and beyond. The orbiting cycles of the planet Jupiter and Saturn aligns within a great conjunction. Our life cycle is embodied in femininity from conception to birth, from ovulation to menstruation, the release process that rids the body of waste matter in preparation for the possibility of a new birth cycle. These movements and events in time are based on an orchestration that is far greater than one's personal agenda.
Overstand, 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 said the old bold soul of the oldest old man who walked the land with a stick in his hand. Overstand, overstand the nature of who you be as a part of humanity, and then you'll understand the nature that opposes green earth, solar conscious femininity.
These cycles have been tracked and traced thousands upon thousands of years within our ancestral tradition as children of the sun. From the master timekeepers of the Kemetic Naga priesthood to the tribal high priest of the Dogon in Mali, West Africa. These keepers of sacred ancestral knowledge, wisdom, and comprehension charted the movements of the great year, which is a cycle of roughly 26,000 years, and the halfway mark of the Banu cycle, which is roughly 12,594 years. Within a vast span of time, devoted priesthoods preserved the tellings of our first Genesis as the twin births of masculine and feminine energy within the divine union of oneness, simple, oneness of mind, oneness of body, oneness of spirit, a holistic living consciousness of oneness. It is said that no man stops the tide, and if one refuses to move when the tidal wave comes, one will be swept away or submerged by the coming waters. Let us get straight to the point. Research indicates that Mother Earth cools roughly every 100,000 years, with vast areas of North America, Europe, and Asia being buried under thick ice sheets. Then the pendulum swings back, and Mother Earth gets warmer, and the ice masses melt based on her femininity receiving the sun's incoming masculine energy of heat. Man-made contamination, pollutions, toxic emissions has in fact caused extreme imbalances within the cycle, and these extreme climate changes are just the tip of the iceberg, marked in time, and more importantly, marked in consciousness. The pendulum swings in a recycling process to salvage any reusable material that can be transformed into the new cycle, while releasing the hazardous waste matter that has proven to be harmful to the overall health of Mother Earth's living system, her body, and her offspring. Yes, the feminine energies of Mother Earth are in a detoxing, purging, and healing cycle. In some circles, this is called the return of the divine feminine, or the return of the goddess. However, the I and I reference our origin, the first Genesis, the green gods and goddesses of the black lands, the Osirian resurrections recorded and handed down by the Kemetic Naga priesthood. Asar represented the flooding waters of the Nile River that enriched the black fertile soil of the Nile Valley in that ancient sacred garden culture. Asar, the divine guiding and protective nature of supreme masculinity, forwarding the fluids of life to activate the nurturing essence of femininity, the green fertility goddesses, Aset and Nebuchadnezzar, who would birth a new life cycle.
There was a timekeeping map that had been preserved to reveal the reality of the magnificent presence of the children of the sun. The artifact called the Zodiac of Dendera was another bas-relief uncovered during the warlord Napoleon's invasion and conquest of Egypt. The bas-relief carved in sandstone represented the map of the night sky as recorded on the ceiling in the temple of Heteru at Dendera. The ancestral temple of the goddess Heteru was noted to be where the mysteries of the resurrection of Asar were celebrated. We note that on this ancient zodiac, the symbol of Aquarius was represented as Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, pouring water from two vases. The fact that Aquarius represented the flooding of the Nile was a time marker used by the sacred ancestral Naga priesthood to mark an unseen calendar that does coincide with a cycle of global warming that will cause a meltdown of the cold and pale mental mindset. Thus, there was no coincidence in the rise of planet Sirius and the coming of the floodwaters that came every year, causing the Nile to overflow. A divine intervention was already foretold in the coming of the water bearer, who would bring the floodwaters of melting ice. Yes, Asar represents the sacred ancestral masculine presence of the divine children of the sun, who were naturally and innately encoded to provide divine guidance and protection for the sacred garden culture from which we come. Taken from the Asarian Sacred Ancestral Temple of Christ by High Priest Kwatamani.
Thus, the divine guiding and protective nature of He, ejaculated into the womb of She, inspires the principles of divine order to be nurtured in her womb, the first classroom of He and She, to recycle divine order through divine socioeconomic family community. As it is above, so it is below, for it is the rich, fertile soil that causes the tree of life to grow. Simply speaking, life begets life. Life does not sustain death, and death does not sustain life. Two different natures of energy, and two different natures of energy cannot occupy the same space at the same time. And when we look at the many living systems that support life here on Mother Earth, we see that there's order, principles, and consequences if one does not align within the universal laws that governs the essence of life. If one looks at one's own presence, one can reason that there are requirements to maintain a healthy and wholesome state of being. There are duties, obligations, and responsibilities to maintain a state of health. We look to the sacred garden culture's indigenous, aboriginal, native mothers and fathers of humanity, what we of the first Genesis tribe call the divine children of the sun. Divine because these sun-kissed populations lived in harmony with Mother Earth, with Mother Nature, lived in harmony with each other, in harmony with divine guiding and protecting masculine energy and divine nurturing and affectionate feminine energy unified. Divine because these communal keepers of humanity's DNA genetic storehouse was sustained by a holistic living nature of consciousness for thousands upon thousands of years. When we look at our sacred garden culture origin, we see a model of wholesome health and well-being that is, in fact, divine social, economic, family, community order. The original parenting consciousness of the divine children of the sun resonates in a collective memory as the time of peace, harmony, and oneness with earth, wind, rain, and sun, a golden age. The remnants of such a way of life can still be found, where principles and practices of reverence for the sanctity of life are the root, base, and foundation of a holistic living way of life, a sustainable way of life that has stood the test of time. Throughout recorded history, however, various branches of humanity's family tree did migrate into an environmental condition that could not sustain a sacred garden culture way of life. As a result, these populations did undergo adverse changes. Populations mutated and degenerated into a lower and lesser consciousness of blood-spilling flesh consumption. The pressures of harsh and varying environmental extremes, either freezing ice cold or scorching desert heat, changed the nature of consciousness. As a result, the male changed from being the provider of divine guidance and protection for the female and offspring into being an individualistic male whose first priority is self-preservation, that is to say, the will of self to survive above all things else, and let thy will be done became the order of his way. This individualistic mindset was then nurtured by the female and multiplied into every offspring and vibration of the generation next. Divine order or toxic reality, you decide. This individualistic mindset changed the nature of family order from reciprocation to dominating enslavement, separating and dividing the unified bond of he and she, changing the values and worth of masculinity based on who wielded the swiftest ability to kill, maim, conquer, and destroy, as warring, hunting, and later as herding enslavers. Within such a self-deified, male-dominated mindset, the female's worth was devalued, subservient to he who controlled the resources and the food supply. And with this self-deification came the declared right to determine the life or death fate of others, as it suited the self-asserted will of he, and any challenger was seen as a threat. As we track this invading nature of conflict, confusion, and chaos, we note that the honoring of Mother Earth and the nurturing abundance of her sacred garden culture changed into the glorification of a death consumption culture, a culture of war, greed, jealousy, envy, and wrath. The green earth solar conscious male, guider and protector of the indigenous parenting consciousness of humanity, stood as a threat to he who plotted and schemed to dominate, control, and rule the world by any means deemed necessary, claiming superiority over conquered populations, possessing the resources and the lands of the children of the sun. The very precise strategy of warring male conquerors was stated as kill the male, rape, dominate, control the mindset of the women so as to enslave the children. The choice in many instances was submit or die, and so those who were left alive were mentally reconditioned to submit to the will of a nature that opposed his and her green earth solar conscious existence as a child of the sun. We shall not spend too much more time studying the false glory of such a mindset, because these days all one has to do is look around the world to see what has manifested from the leaders and breeders and power brokers of self-deified individualism. The power and glory of conquest throughout history left a bloodstained trail. Every monotheistic campaign and religious crusade, every genocidal massacre of indigenous population, every attack spread patriarchy and supremacy like a plague. That is why the I state that the self-deified consciousness functions like a mental virus that has infected the planetary body of humanity to a severe state of toxic disorder. We invite you here to reason, understand clearly, beyond any shadow of a doubt, one major point. The cold, pale, and toxic nature of self-deified individualism may have emerged among a particular population, within a particular area or location, under particular environmental or social circumstances. However, through divide, conquer, and rule tactics of sexual violation, violence, war, and crime, this divisive mindset did indeed spread like a plague and has in fact become a norm among all who were forced, coerced, bred, or otherwise maneuvered into assimilating, integrating, and adopting a way of life that stands opposed to the natural and innate existence of the children of the sun and our green earth solar conscious way of life. With that said and done, the green earth shifting, changing functions of this great conjunction is about restoring order. That is the natural and innate state of wholesome health and well-being as children of the sun and the sacred garden culture from which we come. Our focus here is the emerging new breed of masculine and feminine energy, males and females who have decided to detox, purge, and heal from the toxic ordeal of self-asserted individualism so as to devote the wholeness of his and her life energy to the green earth solar conscious resurrection of the generation next. The first divine act and requirement of a holistic living way of life is divine consumption. That is, the physical consumption of raw and living fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, herbs, and spice, so as to provide the optimum fuel for whole life healing. We are directly addressing optimum fuel for the brain, so as the functions of thinking and reasoning can be accelerated to connect with green earth solar conscious attitudes, values, behaviors, and comprehension. By increasing one's capacity to think and reason beyond the mental program of a self-centered nature, one indeed raises and expands one's consciousness past the isolated, separated, and limited perspective of the individualistic self. The next step within detox and purging to heal is to confront the imbalances and deficiencies of one's own individualistic masculine or feminine identification of self. The male has been groomed into irresponsibility within a framework of sexual conquest. He's also become spoiled, reactionary, and excused from being fully accountable for his actions. The female has been groomed into struggling for equality within masculine terms of domination and control, to the point that she rebels against the gentle, warm essence of femininity, filled with too much drama, bitterness, and spite, while becoming the primary agent of an energy that opposes her existence. In fact, he and she has fallen into the trap of fueling a divisive nature of energy that opposes his and her natural and innate state of being as a sun child. In other words, the green earth-shifting, changing functions of this great conjunction is about restoring order, divine social, economic, family community order, and as such, restoring the wholesome health and well-being of the divine children of the sun and the sacred garden culture from which we come. On behalf of the Kwatamani First Genesis tribe, we say action speaks louder than words, and green earth solar conscious actions speak loudest of all. In the most supreme spirit of love, we thank you for your attention.
And the oldest old man double-gripped his stick and spoke. He said, we have no more time for slowpoke folk.